just because you're working really hard and you're going really fast doesn't mean you or your organization are getting somewhere. So I'm talking to the leaders here in the house. Like sometimes you have to reevaluate.
Welcome to Rise and Stride, where we empower you to take your next step in an ever-changing business landscape. Here's your host, Denise LeDuc-Fremming, President and CEO of the California Society of CPAs.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Rise and Stride, where we bring together diverse voices to explore leading topics to help you navigate the seemingly ever-changing business landscape. Today, we are excited to have with us Felina Danalis, a certified somatic experiencing practitioner and author who works with individuals and leaders to transform their relationship with stress and money from the inside out, and helps them recognize the cues that shape their financial decision-making, leadership, and risk tolerance. Felina, I can't wait to talk to you because I need help in all these areas. I think we all do. We all need some assistance. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on Rise and Stride today.
I'm so honored to be here with you, Denise. And I just want to give a shout out to Cal CPA. I attended my first Cal CPA event just a few months ago. And I just want to tell if folks are listening and you're new to the podcast or you're new to Cal CPA, get yourself to one of these in-person events because I just saw and met the most extraordinary people who are passionate and committed and really some really profound change makers in this space. So just want to give a huge shout out to the work I see being done at Cal CPA and to you personally before we jump in.
Well, I just want to thank you for showing up and for presenting and just leading, I think, our audience in really some different thinking. We get really caught up in our everyday and what we need to produce, right, and our outcomes. Sometimes we just don't take the time for ourselves or really to think about and reflect. And even when I was reading through, I just went to your website. I was doing some homework, and then I was reading through the questions. Like, yeah, I really never take the time that I need to. So this is going to be therapeutic for me also. So I appreciate you taking time.
I love that. I love that. And what it's signaling, I think, is to everybody who's listening is that we don't have to be running constantly. We don't have to be constantly chasing. We actually can have a little bit more spaciousness. And that just makes all the difference. When we can take the opportunities, when things aren't on fire, right? Then we can take the opportunities to have a little bit of spaciousness. I say the effects of stress are cumulative, and so are the effects of well-being practices. So if we can just slow down just a tiny bit as folks are listening, whether you're on a walk or you're in the car, wherever you are, if you can just, take a deep breath and join us for the ride, I'm sure it'll be a lot more fun for all of us.
I love that. So maybe we can start with your journey because you have a different journey, which we all do. I just, the more I talk to individuals and, see where they started and where they are, not where they end up, because we all end up in many different places throughout our life. As we learn, you had a different journey. And so it's interesting. You went from international diplomat, working with World Bank and the EU to becoming a facilitator and coach. So walk us through how that, because very linear, I would think, in what you were and who you were working with, right? You talk about very smart individuals. And how did you make that switch, or, what went through your mind?
Yeah. I think anybody who is like a mid-career or senior professional can probably look back on on their career and say, wow, how did all that happen? Right? Like a lot of times we don't know how it happened. So just to give folks some context, I started my career and everything went according to plan. I got a graduate degree in international economics and I started working for the World Bank soon after. And then I was in the field and I was doing work that was really, really interesting, very difficult. I was traveling around the world. I was helping make an impact on communities that were really harmed by poverty and by war. And so it was really, really meaningful. And, as a first generation college student, first generation American, like this was like a big deal in my family and in my lineage. And then there was an incident that happened that really changed things overnight. And what I saw was that my nervous system had been in survival mode for a really, really long time. And
Mhm.
I didn't even know that. So even when after the incident happened, and it was a fatal car bombing in the Balkans, and after the incident happened, it was as if the lights had been switched off and my nervous system completely went into another mode, and I was still able to perform. I was still able to function, but it was like there was something happening inside of the foundation of the house was starting to show some pretty serious fissures, and slapping a layer of paint on it wasn't going to change it. And so what happened was I went on a profound and extensive multi-year, multidisciplinary healing journey to see what had actually happened in my own nervous system. And what I discovered was that so many of my colleagues who were doing this really kind of high pressure, being in a war zone is maybe not as stressful as doing taxes. It's pretty close, right?
I hope not.
It's a pretty stressful environment, and what I started seeing was a lot of my colleagues who were attracted to that kind of work also had nervous systems that were really kind of always running on high. So the way I describe it was that my nervous system was like it was like a pot of water that was boiling at 99.9 degrees, and it didn't take much for it to kind of switch over into boiling. And since then, over the last couple of decades, I have learned so much about the human nervous system and our response to stress. And so I take that into work with individuals and organizations to understand, okay, are you at a place where you're actually thriving in your career, in your health, in your relationships, in your finances? Or are you just barely performing and it just takes one little thing to kind of knock you over? And so that's kind of how the trajectory kind of evolved.
So interesting because you made that connection between, the financial economic because that's your background, right? To the nervous system. How did you just go there and know that intuitively?
Yeah, well, I didn't, right? I didn't. I studied everything that everybody else studied, and my graduate degrees from Johns Hopkins and Georgetown, and I got degrees in basic economics that you learn, and you learn supply and demand, and you learn that things are logical and rational, and I didn't really notice that there was a lot of assumptions based on those models of economics. That as I went out into the world, I discovered those assumptions actually don't really apply. Things like perfect information, right? People don't have your clients have to make investment decisions every single day. They don't
Mm.
have perfect information, right? But we make assumptions when we talk about the field of economics and finance and the fields that your listeners are really engaged in. And what I discovered over time was the more people I talked to and the more different kinds of industries, whether it was when I was living in Europe or in the US, what I discovered was that while yes, there are some logical, rational frameworks for economics and financial behavior. I think we can gain a lot more from behavioral economics and really seeing how emotions tend to drive a lot more of our behavior around financial decision making than anything we could logically or rationally plan.
I think you see the stock market performing that way all the time. You think
Absolutely.
it's data but it's so much emotion. That's the
Absolutely. And
so
what I love about what you're saying, Denise, is like really acknowledging, like, we know, like, things like, some of your listeners might remember the term irrational exuberance, right? Some of us who are old enough to remember what that term means. And that's really this idea that, like, when we collectively all say that something is happening, it might not be rational, but if we keep acting according to that pattern, like those developments will play out. And that has benefit for some people and for some organizations and for some systems, and it doesn't for others,
I I have not remembered that term. I love that because, right, it says a lot,
right?
with those 2 words, and I don't remember when that was being used. It was
I believe it was Alan Greenspan talking about it in the 1980s. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and he was the the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he was talking about irrational exuberance. And this was the idea, to give younger folks, if you're listening to this and you don't have much gray hair, you're like, what are these people talking about? I want to offer some context, which is this idea that sometimes markets and sometimes financial systems can really display behavior that is completely irrational and it is unhinged. So people might talk about, valuations of companies, for example, that have no basis in reality. And so when we make a connection with the nervous system, what that does is that brings us kind of out of the head, because like you can imagine right now, I could imagine telling you, Denise, like, imagine yourself on the surface of Mars, right? Because of the way the brain works, you can imagine yourself there, right? You can imagine yourself in a spacesuit. You can imagine yourself looking around. You can imagine those things. But when it comes to embodying reality, that takes a lot longer. And so that takes an awareness of how the nervous system works to ground us in this realm, in this reality. And when we combine that embodied awareness, that somatic awareness, and I can unpack what somatic means if
Yeah.
that's helpful. Let me just double click on that. Would that be helpful just to pause right
I
here?
think it'll be helpful to to our audience and
Yeah.
for me to always hear it again. Thank you.
Yeah. So the word somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means body, right? So I'm Greek, and just because of that, I love to throw around lots of Greek words. So if you hang out with me, you'll hear a lot of them. I don't carry Windex with me. So just so you know, a lot of people have seen my big fat Greek wedding and they ask, do you do the
Oh,
Windex things? And we don't, no, we don't do that. But anyway, so soma comes from this Greek word meaning of the body. So when we talk about somatic, we are talking about information that has to do with the body and the nervous system specifically. So somebody might say, "Oh, I have a lot of social anxiety." What they're describing is, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't diagnose people, but in common parlance, what very often they are describing is there's a lot of activation that happens in my nervous system when there's different kinds of simulation. And so if we can understand a little bit about what what that term means, it can help us a lot in our relationship with money, our relationship with our colleagues, our relationship with our careers.
hmm. So tell me more about the somatic piece in helping individuals with their financial decisions, their any decision, right? Relationships. Help connect those.
Yes. Yeah, I love this. So, let's say you are advising a company and it is run by a founder, and you see that they are doing everything right. That small company is doing everything right. And you're a trusted advisor and you're encouraging them, listen, you've got to do some more visibility. You've got to get out on the speaking circuit. You've got to do some podcasts. You've got to get your name out there. You've got this wonderful service and this wonderful product, but nobody knows about you, and you're talking to a founder that is talented, capable, hardworking, has a great team that they're working with, but they won't get out in front of people. And so you, as their advisor, feel really frustrated by this. You're like, why can't I motivate this person to go get out in front of people? If you peel back the layers, maybe, just maybe, that person is a woman, or maybe that person is a person of color. And maybe in that person's lineage, they've had experiences where being visible was not necessarily the best thing for them, right? Like we're in California. We have a lot of, I come from an immigrant community and lots of folks listening come from an immigrant community. We have a lot of mixed status families in our communities, right? There's some folks who are documented and other folks that aren't. If you've been raised in one of those families, you might have gotten the message that being visible could actually is not a good thing to do. Being visible actually could bring harm to the people that you love. So you're this founder, right? And then maybe you come from this community and you feel this push pull. You have a gas and a brake. You want to move forward with your business. You want to succeed. You want to excel. But then there's this brake happening in your nervous system, which says visibility is bad. Visibility can get people that you love in a lot of trouble. And so there's this constant push pull dynamic. And just like in a car, if you are pressing the gas and the brake at the same time, what happens? You spend a lot of energy, but you don't go anywhere.
Hmm. I could see that impacting from leadership standpoint so many individuals, right? And needing to understand kind of the connection between that. So I want to double click on this because You describe your work in somatic psychology as, I want to just make sure I get this right, as a global strategy meets the biology of leadership. And I think that's what you're describing there, right? So, probably a new concept for a lot of us because we haven't heard that specifically. But can you like walk us through what that means and what that looks like and how we as leaders can help be better leaders, listeners, and supporters and advocates for individuals?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I love the care that I hear, right? Because I know everybody who's listening to this, like you care about your teams, you take care about your colleagues, you care about your community, you care about your clients, right? You people, this is a caring community of people who are listening to this podcast right now. So imagine, let's say for the sake of argument, you're in your 20s, right? And it's one of your first jobs, and you are called to an all staff meeting, and your boss comes in the room, and you can feel your boss is in a really bad way. You can feel that, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? You can right? We can all recall,
Yeah.
right? Having that some feeling like in the pit of your stomach, like, uh-oh, something bad is about to happen. Even before that person opens their mouth, because of the nature of interpersonal biology, we can feel what's happening in the nervous systems of other people around us, right? There's this concept called mirror neurons where we can actually feel, right? That's why when you go to a sad movie and you watch a sad movie, you start crying, right? Even though it's not happening to you because we have these mirror neurons. So what will happen is, let's say you're in that all staff meeting and the leader has come in and they are in a really bad way. Maybe they're really angry, maybe they're really stressed. Before they open it, you might notice before they open their mouth, you might notice your stomach starts feeling tight.
Mm.
You might notice that pit in your stomach. You might notice that everybody around starts talking really, really fast, or that their eyes are flitting about the room, looking really, really like people are looking back and forth at each other, trying to make sense of what's happening. And if you're young and you haven't had this experience professionally, maybe think back to, an experience you've had with a parent, right? You know when the person who has more power in the system is not doing well or is angry or is frustrated or is disappointed. So, what happens is that sets the tone for everything that happens in that team or in that organization. So, when leaders become aware of what's happening in their own nervous system and they use tools and strategies to become self aware, to manage their own nervous system, everybody on the team is impacted positively. It's like a ripple. It's like you throw a large stone into a pond and it's going to have a big ripple effect. So one of the most important things we can do as leaders, whether you are in your 20s or in your 70s. I just got off a call. I volunteer with a local organization in my community, and there was a gal who was in her 90s who was on the call, and she's still going strong and still, supporting her community initiatives. So
Oh,
whether
nice.
you're in your 20s or in your 90s, it's never too late to learn what's going on inside of you. So as we develop this faculty, this critical leadership competency of self-awareness, we're better able to let our teams and our staff and our community know where we are and what we need. So I really want to encourage folks to be in this space. I see, what's kind of different from Gen Z folks versus I'm Gen X or even, boomers, for example, is Gen Z folks can be really, really good at knowing what's happening in their nervous systems, right? They know when they're dysregulated very frequently. And this can be hard for older folks to people who are more senior maybe to manage, right? Because they're not maybe used to the kind of this language of nervous system regulation, emotional intelligence. But what is really the missing piece is not just knowing what when you're dysregulated, whether you're a young person or a senior person or you're a young senior person. It's being able to regulate in real time. It's being able to ground yourself. It's being able to sit back, take a breath, give yourself, wow, I just noticed in my own system, like I was talking really fast, right? So I just sat back in my chair and I'm like, oh yeah, why am I rushing? Right? There's no reason, there's no emergency. I can sit back and I can speak more slowly. And that's going to impact you, Denise. That's going to impact everybody who's listening, right? So even here, we have an opportunity to be aware of the impact that our nervous system is having others. And the quicker we can catch it, the more likely it is we are going to be able to maintain forward momentum on our goals and visions and the outcomes that we want without getting sidetracked.
Hmm. As you're talking, I can't help but think of the virtual world we're in now. And I think about, I can feel it on a virtual call. I can feel the anxiety of others, but I mean, maybe I can't always, I guess. So, how do I make sure I'm attuned to that? Because when you're in a room, you really can feel it. I mean, you can sense the sitting back, like there's different cues, but in a virtual, it's harder. So, how would you say we can better be aware of that when we're together and we're in a group?
Yes, I love this question so much. So I do a lot of work with organizations virtually, and I give tools and teams lots and lots of tools for how to manage that. But I'll give your listeners one simple tool that you can use on a regular basis and that you can start practicing yourself. And you can actually do it right now. We can actually do it right now. So it's really about taking a spot check of kind of tuning into yourself. And I like to keep it really, really simple. And that's green, yellow, and red light. So you might take a moment to notice just what's happening inside of your body. Can you feel your feet on the ground? Are you sitting forward in your chair? Or are you sitting back, letting yourself be supported? Is your stomach kind of clenched and tight, or is there tightness in your throat? Or are you feeling kind of relaxed and kind of okay, right? Like I'm noticing in my nervous system right now, like I'm pretty high energy because I'm talking about like my favorite thing in the world. But I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel my seat supporting me. So I'm pretty grounded. So I would say I'm in a green. So you might be maybe having a little bit more activation in your system. Maybe you had a really distressing call with a client right before you got onto the podcast, right? Maybe they pulled a big sponsorship for an event you've got going on, right? And they're like, oh, sorry, we can't sponsor you this year. And you're like, now you have to scramble. Or maybe perhaps something personal, right? Maybe you've been sitting with your uncle for the last 10 days by his side and he finally transitioned, right? And he lost his life. So maybe there's something personal and so your activation and stress level is more at a yellow. Or maybe you've had a confluence of events happening in your nervous system. You know, maybe your kid just told you, even though they were planning on going to Cal State San Bernardino this fall, they just let you know, they just announced that they're changing their plans entirely and they're not going to college this year. And you're scrambling, right? While dealing with maybe a massive valuation that just happened on the stock market and and clients calling you like frantically asking for advice. So in that case, you might be in a red. So I just want to take a pause and give folks who are listening a moment to tune in. Where are you, green, yellow, or red in this moment? Not how you were yesterday, not how you're going to be tomorrow, but just in this moment. If we can know that for ourselves, if we're in in a position of leadership, we can always tune in with our teammates and ask them, "Hey, I'm noticing like I'm like in a yellow zone right now, right? Great. If there's a couple of greens in the space, they can do a little bit more of the lifting for us today. If we're all red today, oh, maybe that's not the day we're going to talk about upcoming layoffs, right?
Mhm.
So using this tool, this really, really simple tool, and I like to break things down to give people practical tools for their teams and for themselves. Once you can get a sense of that, you can better know like, oh, I need to take some stuff off of the agenda for today, right? I can push that to tomorrow's meeting. I can push that until next week. What can I do for my team right now to support some folks? Do we need to schedule some time after the meeting to go for drinks together after work? Do I need to clear my calendar so I can listen to one of my direct reports who maybe just lost somebody but didn't have the space to share that previously, right? When we do this yellow, green, red check-in, again, we don't have to go into the whole narrative description of what's going on, but if we get practice tuning into ourselves, we can better communicate with our teammates. And that's really when teams and organizations can really gel and move forward together cohesively rather than in a fragmented way.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Just kind of understanding and being able to be flexible and change based on what you're seeing or hearing. Because that isn't typical, right? A lot of times we just know we need to do this and we do it. So, as I'm thinking about that and thinking about firms, and as you said, where we're all headed and we're all moving so fast and things are uncertain, how does a firm become, and knowing what the younger generation, right? And I don't even think it's younger. I think it's every generation kind of wants the flexibility. They want to have meaningful work, right? Purposeful work. Knowing that's out there, how do you be, what is it, nervous system informed kind of CPA first? CPA firm, how do you adjust to that or become more informed that way and activate that way?
Yeah, I love this question. I want to double back though quickly before we get to that because I want to get there. So if you could put a pin in that, let's come back.
Yep.
But I want to talk about software changes. So, and this sounds kind of like a silly thing, right? But I can't tell you how many organizations I talk to and how many individuals I talk to who are like, I'm in my company, I love what I do, but we are constantly adapting to new tools so quick. We haven't even had a chance to do the training and the learning from the previous set of tools we had, and they're giving us new tools, right? Like we don't even get 6 months to adapt to the new tool, and we're given a new tool. So I want to name that. Like if things seem like they're going faster for people, it's also because A, they are, and B, in the absence of an awareness of nervous system regulation, we're just going to keep going faster and faster and faster. And you might have seen a dog chase its tail. Just because it's going faster doesn't mean it's getting anywhere, right? Like, I want people to really, really hear that. Just because you're working really hard and you're going really fast doesn't mean you or your organization are getting somewhere. So I'm talking to the leaders here in the house. Like, sometimes you have to reevaluate. So let's go back to your first question. How do you begin? How does an organization, how does a company begin on a path to becoming more nervous system informed and to becoming more aware of these dynamics? Once again, I'm going to go back to leadership. We have to start with leadership. For many years I worked in Europe and I worked in the field of corporate social responsibility and sustainability, and I worked with really large companies that were listed on the stock exchange, helping them with their ESG performance. And very often what we would hear from folks is I would hear from managers, internal managers and vice presidents would say to me, I have said the same things that you are saying to my leadership, but because you're coming from the outside and you're saying that,
Mhm.
they're listening to you, right? Like we've all kind of had this dynamic that happens. And so it's important to recognize some of those dynamics of being aware of sometimes you are if the initiative to be more nervous system informed or trauma informed or culturally responsive or whatever term that feels most accessible and available to you doesn't come from leadership truly embodying these principles and values and modeling this behavior, it's not going to happen. So it really comes down to modeling. I remember some time ago, I was collaborating with somebody who was at one of the big four consulting firms and who had a pretty senior leadership position in Europe. And they had gone through a pretty significant loss during COVID. They lost a family member, and we were kind of talking about their employee wellness programs and well-being programs. And I said, oh, and they were talking about like how great their well-being programs were. And I said, that's wonderful. Did you avail yourself of any of those? And what they said to me was so interesting, right? What they said to me was, no, I didn't, but I have that available for my team. So here's what I told that person, right?
Mhm.
Your team is watching your behavior. Your team is watching more than anything you say about work-life balance, more than anything you say about your values, they are watching what you actually do. And if they are observing that you are prioritizing your nervous system regulation and that that will also lead to professional success, they will do that, right? We're really simple. At some level, I say it and I don't say it facetiously. We are mammals, right? Monkey see, monkey do. If we see, right? If we see the monkey at the top of the heap exhibiting a particular type of behavior, we are going to exhibit that behavior if we want to succeed in that environment. So it all comes down to the more responsibility we have in our organization, the more responsibility we have to practice, to learn what nervous system regulation is about, to practice that for ourselves, to get support for ourselves and for our teams if we don't know, because we have a bigger impact on everybody around us.
Mhm. That's always so hard as a leader to make sure that because you're like, "Well, I have to do this," or "I have to do this," and it's difficult, to your point. You really need to be the example, and I don't think we always think that way. And to your point, the more, responsibility you have, the more you need to make sure you lean in.
And it's also the question of the incentive structure, right? So this is, I'm a big believer, like I said, my background is in economics. So I'm very aware of incentive structures, right? How are we harmonizing our incentive structures with kind of our stated vision, values, and mission in an organization? I think that's a really important point. A lot of times, I've done with work, with all kinds of organizations from Google to healthcare organizations to Yale and all kinds of organizations. And very frequently, what'll happen is you'll get an idea of like, oh, we should do more for well-being for our teams, right? We should have a well-being workshop, or could you come in and do something for our team? And what I like to tell them, and if you're thinking of reaching out, this is what I will tell you. If you are trying to slap a coat of paint on a building that is collapsing, it's not going to help, right? You have to look at the structure of the organization. You have to look at the incentive structure of the organization. You have to look at what the paths are to leadership. And if you can be honest about what those are, and you can harmonize those with a nervous system centered approach to mindfulness, to work life balance, then you've got an honest conversation. Very often companies will come to me after they have done like well-being workshops with mindfulness practitioners. And I have done those myself, and there's no shame in that. There's no harm in any of that. I've taught meditation to corporations and at corporate retreats, and it's great. If, however, it isn't deeply embedded, these practices and this way of being isn't embedded into the incentive structure and into the way of evaluating performance in the long term, where people are given the support they need, actually, it doesn't have integrity, right? That's just the bottom line. It doesn't have integrity. So just like you wouldn't slap a coat of paint on a building that's falling apart, if your team is burnt out and you just give them access to a meditation app, it's not going to help. I hate to take it. I hate to break it to folks. It might give some temporary relief, but it's really not going to address the causes of burnout.
Mhm. The Calm app won't just do it, will it?
The call, and I have nothing against the call. Like,
I don't either.
I love all of the apps. I used to teach meditation, and I'm a big fan. But we're talking about strategy here, and that's when we talk about biology and leadership, we're talking about having an integrated strategy, which in the AI world, this is the conversation all of us have to be having.
Mhm. I love the economic, because you understand those pieces, and a lot of times, we don't think about all of it, right? And so then we miss really having that incentive, because what you incentivize is what you're gonna get at the end of the day. It's
100%.
it's just the way it is, and I don't think a lot of times, I'm gonna point to myself too, we always think about that.
Well, that's a beautiful point, Denise. And I'll give you an example. So I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm a coach and I'm a practitioner, and I say that to folks really, really intentionally because I don't pathologize everybody, and I also talk a lot about the context that we're operating. Can I share a quick example of a
Please do.
leader that I worked with? So I worked with a leader a number of years ago who was stewarding a multi-million dollar organization, a performing arts center in the U.S. And he had come to me to do some work around nervous system regulation and integrating some of the other kind of work that he had done. And he had been in psychotherapy for a really long time. He had been in psychotherapy for like 30 years. He knew all of what his issues were. But every time he would come to one of our sessions and we would talk about what was happening in his leadership style. He was an LGBT person, and that informed a lot of some of his experiences in his community. And what would he would talk about how lonely he felt. He would keep coming on to our coaching calls, and again and again and again, he would talk about how lonely he was. And one day we're having this coaching session, and it was a very, very successful person running, a multi-million dollar organization. And which is, we have an epidemic of loneliness in our society. So I'm not surprised when people talk about that. I think it's wonderful that we finally can have those conversations. And I asked him a question, and I said, I said, Mike, that's not his real name. I said, Mike,
I assume so.
right? I almost said his real name, so I had to pause myself. I said, Mike, where do you live? And he said, I live in a house. And he told me the city that he lived in. It was a large city in Texas. And I said, okay. And can you tell me about your neighborhood? And he said, well, I live in a gated community, and, there's, a lot of similar houses nearby. And, some of my neighbors are cool, and, some of them are not so cool. And I asked him a question, and I said, Mike, did it ever occur to you that maybe one of the reasons you feel lonely is because you live behind walls?
Mm.
And he paused and he said, Felina, in 30 years of psychotherapy, talking about my anxiety, no one ever asked me that question. And the reason I'm mentioning it to your listeners here, right, is because the context we're in matters. We
Mhm.
cannot separate our we cannot separate the mind from the body, and we cannot separate the body from the systems that we're operating in.
And I think about just that something so simple is a question you wouldn't ordinarily even ask yourself, right? It's just understanding yourself and then some of the variables there. It's fascinating. Just trying to think of myself, like we all do, right?
And that's the best thing we can do, and I really want to encourage, everybody who's listening, you might not relate to living behind in a gated community. You might be a member, you might be somebody who's in the LGBTQ community. I live in Palm Springs, California, where we have a really thriving LGBTQ community. You might be a person of color. You might be from an immigrant community. You might be from another community that hasn't necessarily always had proximity to resources. And so those cultural impacts are going to shape how you show up in your relationship to money. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited that I'll be speaking at the club summit next month, on talking about the cultural complexity of money, because a lot of times we kind of assume that one size fits all. And that is not my approach. My website used to say, you're not a cookie. You don't need a cookie cutter approach, right? You're not a cookie. You're a human being with your own lived experience. And when we work with that with an individual and with organizations, we can really get the most out of the best out of our most underutilized resources, and that's our people.
Mhm. And the ones really the resource that's the most, valuable, right? That creates the differentiation for the organization, truly, the people. So we're running short on time. We could talk a long time, Felina. So give us a little pitch for your session, and then just more for like how we need to be thinking differently, the financial piece, how to have that conversation, because that's hard for a lot of us.
Yeah. So the conversation we're going to be having at the club summit next month is really going to be about the cultural complexity of money and how our identities, how our lived experiences, how the stories that we've heard from our lineage impact our relationship with money, right? Was, people in our lineage, did they lose their assets? Were they confiscated by the state? Were people forced to migrate? Like all of this material can seriously impact our relationship with money. So if you're serving folks as a CPA or a financial advisor, it's a great start to kind of start questioning getting to know yourself first, getting to know yourself on a somatic level, what's happening in your own nervous system, but also your cultural awareness of what money means, and start talking to your friends and family about it. Like, what does money mean in your family? It might mean something different. In some people's family, money means safety. In other people's family, money might mean freedom. So it means different things depending on your culture and your lived experience. But I want to offer folks a tool because I know I've offered kind of some high level thinking today, and I want to give some practical advice here. Yeah, of course. So, and if people want to find out more, they can go to my website, to the Embodied Money Trauma Reset, which is a program I do with individuals who are like, oh yeah, it's time for me to up level my relationship with my nervous system and with money. But I want to give a quick snapshot of something that can be really helpful that you can use yourself and that you can share with your clients right away. So I sometimes call it a resilience sandwich. Okay. Right. A sandwich. Right.
Sounds good so far.
Exactly. So, a sandwich is basically two things on the outside with something yummy on the inside. Right. So sometimes we have to switch it around. But the way I think of a resilience sandwich is this: say you don't like looking at your finances, right? Say, you might even be a CPA and you're like, I don't want to look at my own stuff. Like I got to look at my clients' financials all day. I don't want to look at my own stuff. So let's say you've heard there's been rumors that there's been some big IPOs on the stock market. You need to rebalance your portfolio, for example, like hypothetically speaking, right? And let's say you really very hypothetically speaking, right? And let's say you really don't want to do that. When you think about doing that, your stomach gets tight. You're like, oh God, I'd rather do anything in the world than that, right? So maybe, and if this isn't the case for you, maybe you can think of something that is. What you want to do is to begin to, we can't continue to avoid issues, right? Because that just makes them get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you end up being that client who walks into the CPA's office like with the bag full of receipts, right? You've all had that client who walks in with the bag of receipts. Nobody wants that client, but we've all been that I've been that person. So what you want to do is you want to support your nervous system. So let's say I know I need to rebalance my portfolio and I have a really full week. Okay, I'm going to look at my calendar and I'm going to say, okay, when on my calendar do I have a little bit more spaciousness? And I'm going to I'm going to block out some time on Saturday afternoon, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something really, really wonderful for myself beforehand. So let's say I'm going to go to lunch with a friend on Saturday afternoon and I'm going to have a really good meal. I'm going to get some protein in my system. I'm going to tell my friend, hey, you know what? When I go home, I'm going to go rebalance my portfolio, right? And if your friends, somebody like me, they might be like, oh, I hear you, sister, right? They might be like, that's great. Then you're going to go home, and before you sit down at your computer, you're going to put on some music you like, right? Like I love Baroque music. So I might put on a playlist that has some classical music on. Or maybe you're going to grab your favorite essential oils, right? Or maybe you're going to make yourself a great an iced latte. And you're going to park it next to your computer, right? You're going to get yourself resourced, right? This is the one side of the sandwich, right? And then you're going to set a timer. This is the key. This is crucial. We want to develop trust with our nervous system when it comes to things we have been avoiding, particularly if we have a history of post-traumatic stress, which many people do. You want to set a timer of what is a reasonable amount of time. So if you have been ignoring your finances for years and years and years, you're not going to go in and spend 3 hours. Right? Maybe you go in, maybe you say, I'm going to spend 15 minutes. So you set a timer. You set a timer on your computer and you say, I'm going to go in and I'm going to see what can I accomplish looking around on the Vanguard website to see about rebalancing my portfolio, right? You go in, you look around, you see, oh my gosh, this is going to take a lot more support. And you see, oh, wait a minute. I know what I need to do next time. But as soon as you say that, the alarm goes off. And there's the temptation right there. When the alarm goes off, you're going to be tempted. Oh, I should just stay here. I haven't accomplished anything. And what I'm going to tell you is counterintuitive. Here is the most important part of this podcast that you're going to listen to. If you're still listening, I'm so excited. The most
Money moment.
Here's the money moment. Exactly. The money moment is if you stop when the timer goes off and you go do something kind for your nervous system. You go for a walk around the block. You hug your dog. You jump in the pool for a few minutes. What happens is if you do this practice consistently over time with this resilient sandwich, your nervous system learns that rebalancing my portfolio isn't going to kill me. It's not threatening. And when you do that, you start developing trust in yourself. And when you develop trust in yourself, you can be trusted with money.
Mm, I love that because the resilience is something we all deal with.
And no matter where you are, you can use this resilience sandwich, right? Whatever it is, you find the thing that's kind of challenging. If you have to, if you have to have a one-on-one with a client with a colleague who isn't performing, you do a resilience sandwich for yourself. You get yourself a latte before going in for the meeting, and then afterwards you go for a walk. You do something that's going to help your nervous system land and settle, right? This isn't about avoiding hard things. This is about being in the world, right? And contributing to our goals, supporting our teams, taking care of our families and communities. But it's about doing it in a way that is compassionate and it's human-centered.
Mm-hmm. Right, everyone. Resilient sandwich. You have to remember that because we all can use it. We all can use it for sure. Well, Felina, it's been wonderful talking to you. I've learned so much. I have notes here for myself. And I would just encourage all of you to look Felina up. What's your website again?
The folks can find me at felinadanalis.com, and you can find more details about the embodied money trauma reset at felinadanalis.com/EMTR.
Excellent. And you can also see Felina at our Sub Members Club Summit. So if you haven't registered, please do so. But Felina, thank you so much for making a difference and helping us all be better humans and be better leaders. So we appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's been an honor and delight to be with you.
Thank you. And everyone, have a great day. And we will have our next podcast in the next month. So thank you for joining us.
Rise and Stride is produced by the California Society of Certified Public Accountants. To learn more, visit calcpa.org.